You're listening to the What's Happening podcast with Gary Watts.
Good morning. I'm here this morning with Brad Kunkel, Johnson County Sheriff. So, good morning, Brad. How are you?
Morning. Good. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Glad to have
appreciate
you.
it.
So, tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, congratulations on being elected sheriff.
Thanks.
How long ago was that?
So the election was in 2020.
2020.
If you've never ran for office, I highly suggest doing it. During a pandemic, it's a whole brand new experience on running for office.
Yeah.
Election was in 2020. Started my term in January of 21, and just finishing. Starting my third year in office.
So, pandemic-wise, I mean, you couldn't really meet, or you had to have a mask on, or what? How did that go?
So it was crazy because I actually started campaigning in 2019, and which was a traditional campaign, parades and house parties, meet greets, all those kinds of things. And COVID started blipping on everybody's radar early 2020, or really 2020 is when we started becoming aware of it, seeing this kind of train coming down the tracks. And then it was really that about first week of March when it became, when the world stopped. And so did campaigning. We had just started doing some door knocking. And when COVID shut everything down, campaigning switched to phone calls and texts. So it really stepped up, sitting at home at night, on the phone, calling voters, texting and those kind. You had to switch, and then social media. Really had to rely heavily on social media. So it was a really challenging time to try running for office.
I'll bet.
Sure.
I never thought about running for office, so the politics of that, and then not being able to get out and meet and greet.
Yeah, and in the end, those personal contacts with voters are what matter the most.
Absolutely.
And so when you can't have that conversation at somebody's doorstep, it becomes really tough.
Yeah. Did you serve at all with Gary Hughes? 'Cause I knew Gary, and I know he was the Johnson County Sheriff for 30 years, 25 years?
No, so I was hired in 2001, which is when Sheriff Carpenter was in office.
Okay.
But coincidentally, Sheriff Hughes knew one of my brothers 40, whatever, some years ago, down at through the Hills feed mill. So there's still a little bit of a connection there to Sheriff Hughes. Yep.
I know Gary did a great job and was sheriff for a long time in Johnson County. So, well, let's talk a little bit about your background, where you're from, and then maybe take us through your family, then get into how you got interested in law enforcement.
Yeah, sure. So grew up in West Branch, so just down the road. Born at Mercy Hospital in Iowa City, graduated high school from West Branch, actually in Downey for, a little unincorporated town just south of there. And started my career at the sheriff's office full-time in 2001. Went to Kirkwood right out of high school, started the sheriff's office, been there ever since. And jail for 5 years, worked patrol, and just worked my way up through the sheriff's office over my career. And patrol sergeant for a few years, investigations after that, then sheriff today. So been there 22 years.
So at Kirkwood, what did you had law enforcement studies or background, or
Yep. Went to Kirkwood, got an associate's degree, and then started my career. I actually, my delve into elected office actually started in 2009, I believe it was, when I got elected to the city council in Solon. We were living in town for a while, raising a family. I'd also started going back to school at Iowa, so wanted to get my bachelor's degree, and then decided to run for office about the same time. So got elected to my first term on the city council with, I think, 84 votes was the vote count.
Was that a majority?
Well, there were 4 people running for 2 spots. So ran for office, and I tell you that I spent 6 years on the city council in Solon, and I loved it. It was, local government, especially at your city council, of any local office, is really the most, probably the most rewarding office you can run for, because you can see the fruits of your labors every day.
Right.
Everything from the sidewalks that you walk down to, the Main Street projects you vote on. Those are the things you see, and that that my decision did make a difference. And I really enjoyed it. You get to interact with your neighbors, your friends, and it's a really rewarding experience. And it's too bad, town councils, school boards don't often get a large array of candidates to run, and then turnout's pretty low, and which is unfortunate, because it's the most effective level of government, and it's really enjoyable.
It's a lot of things I've done in town or in Iowa City,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think people appreciate the amount of time that city officials spend
Yeah,
just working on their packets and
absolutely.
their agendas. And I mean, to me, a city council, that's a full-time job. And they're basically do it to volunteer. I mean, it isn't for the money.
No, there's very little money in it. Maybe $50 a meeting. It
Right.
could be for some of these smaller towns. So you certainly don't do it as a way to get a little extra scratch in your wallet. I mean, you
Right.
do it because you care and you want to see things that you can affect and improve. The folks that make the packets are the one, they do a lot of heavy lifting. Your
Right.
city managers, your clerks, those people behind the scenes. But yeah, your counselors are the ones that, I mean, my goodness, it's responding to emails from home. It's when you go to the grocery store, talking to somebody, and it might not be something somebody's happy about, and
Right.
you take that feedback and you try and go forward and make the best decision that you can,
Right.
and hope that what you're doing affects people and people understand why you made the decision that you did.
Right. Well, we're excited to be in Solon. We just opened up a new subdivision called Trail Ridge. It's just
Yeah,
west of
it's-
town. And it's just going fantastic. And just the Solon vibe and the schools and all the folks up there, we're excited about Solon. So
Yeah, the growth up there has been pretty amazing to see, not only as just from a community member and living
Right.
in that community for, gosh, pushing 20 years. It's been that long. But then, serving in elected office in the city and raising a family up there, but also policing it most of my career and having that involvement too. It's been really neat to see both sides of the road for how growth is happening up there and how it continues to grow, and to be in a position where I can in my career to kind of grow along with it and see where it's going. It's really rewarding. It's been like with any growth, there's challenges, but having a good relationship with the city has been very important for the sheriff's office, because we're the law enforcement provider for
Right.
the city of Solon. So we're the police. They don't have their own police department. They contract with us, and it's a really good relationship to have and work closely with them about deciding what's best for the city, how we navigate the contract, how we navigate patrol, and everything else that we do for them, and to look towards the future and how we keep policing them, because there are 3,000 people today.
Right.
There's not only growth west of town. It's north, it's south,
Right.
it's in, and what does policing look like, and how do we prepare for that? Because the policing needs start before the people come. It starts with, once we're turning dirt, then construction sites, as I'm sure you know, become targets for burglary. So
Right.
really the
Yeah.
need for policing starts before folks come to town.
Yeah, we're amazed on that. Some of our trailers get broke into,
Mm-hmm.
and vandalism. It's just kind of sad, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know whether it's kids doing it or what. But we have to be aware of that. So
Everybody does, whether you're the general or
Right.
the guys doing concrete on the side or anything in between. It's a
Right.
constant problem, and everybody deals, especially rural construction it's tough,
Right.
because you're a target for vandalism and for burglaries.
Right.
It's just something that everybody has to kind of struggle with.
So you're married,
Yep.
and you have 3 boys, right?
3 boys. My oldest, he's serving in the Army. He's just actually he's coming home this weekend for 2 weeks of leave, but he's been in the Army for about a year. And
What branch or what type of
so he's a striker mechanic. So
Striker.
essentially, strikers are a kind of an armored personnel
vehicle?
carrier.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
4 axles, does everything on them, from tires to engines to the weapon system. He sent me a picture yesterday of a brand new diesel engine they're going to put in one today, and so and he loves it. He loves what he does, loves serving his country, and then gets to play a lot of golf too. So I'm
good.
a little envious.
Right. Where's he stationed?
Fort Carson, Colorado.
Colorado. Oh yeah.
So, and I think he feels pretty blessed to be there. When he graduated from his AIT, his training in Virginia. At the graduation ceremony, the other soldiers in his group were hearing their assignments and where they're going, and some of his friends went to Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Korea, Germany, and he gets Colorado. So he's very, very lucky, very fortunate. He's
Get a
happy.
little fly fishing in up there, huh?
So he hasn't quite he hasn't talked about that yet, but just a couple days ago he went. They've got a Shields out there, and he FaceTimed me later, showed me all the tackle he bought just to do some more fishing in general. So
Great. Well,
I just want to see if he can get me a line on elk hunting. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what
good.
I'd like to do.
What else? So that's your oldest son?
Yep, this is my oldest. I have a 16-year-old. He plays baseball. In fact, he's got 3 more games this week, I think. He's got a job too, and then my youngest is 11, be 12 in the next month, and he's into baseball, hockey, and being 11.
Yeah.
So 3 boys. Things are good. Things are healthy. Yeah.
You live in Solon. Well, and speaking of baseball, your 16-year-old,
Mhm.
the Solon baseball diamond.
Isn't that something?
I every time I drive by it, I just go, I can't. There's not a blade of. I don't think there's a weed out there.
Oh no, no way.
There just can't be. It's the best diamond in the state by
It was
far.
funny, and the players have such a hand in the state of the field. So, just for example, last night, it had rained before his game, so they have the cover there right outside, right off a home plate in the infield.
Right.
And I watched my kid and some of his buddies are out there getting ready to remove that cover, and they have this argument about the right way to fold it. I mean, they take it as seriously as folding a flag.
Wow.
And, of course, when you're 16, everybody else is wrong. And so, they're having this argument. No, you got to put it this way. But they know how important it is to take it off the right way, because then they got to put it down the right way. And then between games, they rake the dirt. I mean, the coach is out there on the mower smoothing out the field. So it's a pretty impressive facility.
Solon's a 3A school too, isn't it?
I don't know for sure. I can tell you they play teams like tonight's West Delaware.
Yeah.
Regina was last week, so they're playing. I mean, they're tough competitors. They're in a tough league.
So you got. So let's get into law enforcement. So obviously, as a young man, you went to Kirkwood and then furthered your career and started in law enforcement. Let's talk about exactly. Give us some ideas of what you do, what you oversee, the staffing, the manpower, what are some things that not only what people know that you do, that maybe they don't know you do?
Sure.
Some things like that you might want to discuss. So let's just dive into it and talk about the resources you have, what goes on a daily basis, what you're in charge of, just how it all works. Because a lot of people don't realize, other than they may see a traffic violation or something, and they just don't know all the things you do.
Sure. So I think and I'll try not to get too wordy on it, but I struggle with it. So just fair warning. But first, you got to understand the office of sheriff is different than a police chief, and the overarching difference is the sheriff is elected. So I wear 2 hats as an elected official, directly accountable to the people. The people are my boss. They hire me and they fire me. I don't report to a city manager or a board of supervisors. It's the people, the voters are my boss. The rules of the game are laid out in the Iowa Code. So Iowa law under Chapter 331 says, here's the rules of the game for county elected offices, and one of them is office of the sheriff, and here's the specific duties of the sheriff. Same thing for the auditor, the treasurer, whatever. We have a rule book just like anybody else. As far as what we do, so to talk about the office for a minute, we're just shy of 100 full-time employees. We have 77 deputies, including myself, on staff. We'll actually be adding 2 new positions in July, so here next week. Our patrol division continues to grow because, as we talked about, Solon's a good example. As the police for rural Johnson County and the small towns, we have to grow with the community, so we're ready to meet those needs. We police about 35,000 people. If you look at rural Johnson County and the small towns, it's about 35,000 people that live in those areas, and then in Solon, Swisher, Shoeyville, Hills, Lone Tree, Tiffin, and Oxford. So we are the police departments for all those cities. But the patrol division is only a piece of the puzzle. The other big piece of what the sheriff does in any county is the jail. So by law, the sheriff is in charge of running and operating the county jail. And with that comes carrying the bulk of the liability, really, for the taxpayer. Because in county government, your jail is your largest area of risk. You're managing inmates, you're managing people, you're managing health problems, assaultive behavior, all those kinds of things. And so we are in the risk management business too when running and operating a jail. But then the sheriff under the code also has a lot of other responsibilities, such as, so our civil department, for example, is very busy. So anybody who's ever been involved with evictions, subpoenas, garnishments, condemnations, The sheriff is the one that serves that paperwork for the court. Then our records division, so they handle gun permits, sex offender registry, public records requests, all those kinds of things. So anybody who has if you have a concealed weapons permit or a gun permit, you apply and you get that through your county sheriff. Then we have a reserve division, about 30 strong, give or take where we're at in the year, and we rely heavily on our reserves, who are volunteers, to support our mission with public events like the county fair, beef days, patrolling the reservoir, those kinds of things. We rely on reserves for if we have like large crime scenes or large searches we need to do, we'll have our reserves help with that. Then we also have a jail diversion division. This is led by our nurse, who's a full-time nurse working in the jail. And then we have a social worker that works in the jail too, who is accessible in there to help and support inmates, connect them with services, talk to them while they're in jail just to kind of keep things at an even keel, but also look for ways to help provide better services to inmates. Then we have our administration division, which is myself, chief deputy, administrative assistant, and our second deputy. So we have a variety of services, just like any law enforcement division. Or agency. We also have our investigations division, which is made up of we have 4 detectives who do our day-to-day casework, led by a lieutenant in the investigations division. We have a deputy assigned to the drug task force, and then we have another investigator we assign to our joint forensic analysis cyber team, which is our digital forensics team that we started 2 years ago. That's a joint agency or entity with now 4 other police departments, and all they do are digital forensics. So cell phone examinations and extractions, computer forensics, digital video recorders for security systems in buildings, anything with a digital nexus, they are the ones who are doing the examination on those devices. So we have a very wide depth of services here in Johnson County that go way beyond just, back to your point about, it's not just a deputy doing a traffic stop. I mean, we have a very wide variety, breadth of what we do, and it's a full-service law enforcement agency, and we're about the 4th, we're the 4th largest county in the state, and we have, and accordingly, we have a large agency because we have to have the amount of people just to do the work and meet the demands of the public.
Why do you think it's an elected official, the sheriff?
Well,
you ever looked at the history of that?
If you want to go way back in the history, so the word sheriff comes from it's 2 words, the shire reeve you got to go back to England, and the shire reeve was kind of the tax collector for the king. So it was this arm of the government as the tax collector. Well, then, the United States becomes a country, you need to have some sort of law enforcement authority for, your rural folks. So that's why under Iowa law, it's just set up that way. Under county government, you have your treasurer, they collect your taxes. You have recorder, record your documents. You have your county attorney, who's your top prosecutor in the county. And then you have to have somebody with the authority of government to do things like enforce the laws and, execute civil papers and those kinds of things. I think I'm speculating here why it's elected, because the other county offices are. It's a partisan office, which is maybe kind of counterintuitive. You would wonder, why is partisanship part of law enforcement? And I don't know that I have an answer for that, because it does kind of defy logic. But what's important is, even though your sheriff runs on a party line, what's more important above all is the sheriff needs to make sure they're upholding the law and applying the law objectively and fairly to the public. I don't feel I've ever had partisanship, party politics affect how I do my job, because that's not important. Partisanship doesn't save lives. Partisanship doesn't help people go home at night. Right. Training, the law, doing the right thing, that's what helps people go home at night. And that's what's more important to me more than anything, way over party politics.
I got to talk a little bit about the jail. I haven't been in there, but I did go in the old one, and they had an open house in the courthouse. Mm-hmm. And I remember they said, "Hey, come down because we need a new jail." And I don't even know how long ago, 30 years for, I don't know how old the jail. What is it?
It's 44 years old.
44 years old. Wow, I'm starting to date myself. But I remember they had an open house, and I remember Becky and I went into the courthouse, and I could not believe, I don't know if you were ever in here, but it was like this little path to get in, and it kind of went into, I was like crunched up like this, and how a deputy could even get an inmate. I like voted for it, of course. I'm like, I don't know how you guys could do your job with what they were faced with in that old county. It was kind of like a dungeon. I hate to pick on it, but I thought it was good that the public could see that and then try to understand, because when it comes to spending money, everybody gets kind of strange about, oh, do we want to spend any more money, raise our millage rates, what's going on? Well, when I saw it, I was a definite proponent of it way back when. So tell me now, are you running out of room? Are there some things you need? And I hadn't even thought about this until we're sitting there talking about it. What's going on in your current jail?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. It's a very timely topic. The quick history of the jail. So the current one, construction started in 1979, opened in 1981.
Okay.
It was a bond issue that. Thank you for voting for it way back then. Since then, there have been other attempts to pass a bond issue, and they've all failed. So the jail was built with 46 beds. It was double bunked around 1990. So now the current capacity is 92. That doesn't mean we have 92 individuals in there. Our operational capacity is right around 60. And what I mean by operational is that's a good number for the amount of beds that we have, the amount of staff that we have, and then managing the workflow. The rest we house out of county. Actually, today our count is a little low. I believe we're at 54 in-house. So in the building we have now with 12 to 15, I believe, 18, housed out of county. So we continue to house inmates out of county because we don't have the room here. So for 44 years, we've existed in that building, and it's at the end of its life. And this is, we had a facilities audit back in August of last year. A company came in, looked at all county buildings, said, let's look at the internal systems, the plumbing and everything. Their assessment was the building is in very poor condition, needs replaced now. We had a state jail inspection back in February, which is an annual inspection by the state. They required us to have a structural engineer come take a look, and we had that person come in a few months ago. They came to the same conclusion that the building is at the end of its life. Just this morning, for example, when I came to work, a couple of our county maintenance staff were in the building trying to chase down a water leak from the jail. The water issues, sewer pipe issues, these are a constant. They've been a problem really my whole career because the jail is, like any other building, they will come eventually, they become obsolete. And, we spend in the area of $400,000, $500,000 annually housing prisoners out of county because we don't have the room to keep them here. And we continue to spend, exorbitant amounts of money really on maintenance. The roof right now is at the end of its life, but it's not just replacing the roof. It's the HVAC and everything else on it. So it's not just a new, flat roof, call it good. It's a multi-million-dollar project probably to replace the roof. The other thing we continue to run into is as we don't have enough room just for day-to-day inmates, what we're seeing more is post-COVID, we've seen a couple of things. One, jails are tending to have this higher concentration of more serious offenders. And we're also seeing more and more inmates in jail who have, I would call them, higher levels of care or needs that they need met, largely some sort of, serious mental health, self-harm, suicidal ideation, violence, assaultive behavior. And as you have more of those individuals in jail, if they can't be housed in a cell block with other people, they have to be housed individually. We are not designed to be housing 15 people in a cell by themselves. We run out of room very quickly, and it becomes a very, very difficult space to manage because you have to keep your inmates classified properly. And if we can't, and then we wind up having to house them out of county, the cost increases for the taxpayer. So the jail and I go back to what I said earlier, the jail is also just the largest source of liability for the county. You know, the deputies, the nurse, the control center operators, they're really, their business every day is risk management and doing the best they can to keep things secured, keep things safe for the staff and for the inmates. And yet they're doing it in a space that can no longer really accommodate it, has higher levels of, you know, maintenance needs, and with people who have custody issues, medication management, behaviors that we just didn't deal with all the time 20 years ago when I worked up there. It's a completely different world in corrections right now. And you have to have a facility that can handle those things appropriately. And we're getting to a space where that's really becoming hard to do.
Where would it be? Would it be another bond issue? What's the solution?
Yes, so it would be a bond issue. The bond history, if you go back to 2013, were the last time we voted. We tried to pass a bond issue. The bond issue for a county bond referendum like this would require a 60% voter threshold. And the last couple times we voted, it got 50, in the 50, that 57 and 54%, something along those lines. So it got over 50% of the vote, but did not reach 60. And so that's the challenge, is how do you get the public to come out and support this infrastructure need when we need to have the same focus on the jail as infrastructure like we do water, streets, sewer, and everything else. I mean, it's a service that the government has to provide. The county has to provide that. And it's in the best interest of the taxpayer to have a well-run, safely functioning, secure jail that can meet the demands of 2023 and for the next 30 years, not in a building that is 44 years old that's at the end of its life. And it would cost, depending on the number you look at, replacing what we have now, anywhere from, I've seen $4 million, I've seen up to $11 million. We need about $4 million in maintenance today. So does that make sense to the taxpayer to spend this much to Band-Aid something that when you get that work done is now 50 years old and you still need a new one as we grow?
Would you have a new site, tear the existing building down, or?
Yeah, I don't. The site we're on now, we're landlocked. So we have Capitol Street in front of the jail, and then we are surrounded by the University of Iowa parking lot and then a university building on the other side of the street. The jail, when it was built, the sheriff's office, when it was built in open 1981, we had about 50 full-time employees. So we had enough room for parking. We had enough room for the public to come in and do their business. As I mentioned, we're now at almost 100 full-time employees. So we're doing 2023 business as a multi-tiered law enforcement agency out of a building that is, I'll say it, it's as old as me. Yeah. You know, it's built in 1979 is when it was construction started. So that's not it's just not a reasonable thing to expect to do anymore, is have a modern law enforcement agency of our size out of a building built for 50 full-time employees 44 years ago. You know, we've had to renovate space just to add our social worker. We've had to renovate space to add our program for our GPS deputies. Our cyber unit isn't housed on site because we don't have the room. And we're operating it out of essentially downtown Iowa City, which isn't a good thing to do if deputy has to leave the sheriff's office and go to Oxford, lights and sirens, through Iowa City. It's managing risk. It's a lot of liability. So this project is coming. You know, another referendum will be that train is coming down the tracks. We can't ignore this issue forever. We have to look to a long-term solution.
So the supervisor's working on a plan, or were they meeting with architects? Or?
No, so that we haven't got that far. It's right now the groundwork is really on me. As I mentioned, we've had facilities audit, we've had the inspection. Now it is time to really get this in front of the board to talk about what's the long-term plan. I mean, everybody knows it's a problem. We now need to make it a priority, and I think that's the challenge, is moving it from problem to priority. And how do we do that?
I know gun control is kind of a hot topic, and so let's say that you want to take your son hunting, and he's 12, 13. He's getting his first 410 or 28 shotgun. Wants to go out and hunt pheasants. Tell me about how do you get a gun permit, or What's the process now in Johnson County to get a gun?
So gun
Purchasing it.
permits, the law changed about 11 or 12 years ago. Used to be the sheriff had discretion on issuing gun permits. The state changed that, said sheriffs no longer have discretion. Now permits are shall issue. So if you as a wanting to get a gun permit, you fill out the paperwork. It's the same. Essentially, it's the same form you would fill out if you go into the store and buy a gun. So it's your identifying information, and then the yes or no questions about are you a U.S. citizen, you've been convicted of a felony, et cetera, et cetera. We take that paperwork, we do a NICS check, which is the federal background check to make sure you're not a convicted felon, that you haven't been adjudicated mentally ill. And if you pass that background check, I sign the permit, it goes to the state, they issue the permit. So the process is pretty straightforward to get a gun permit. And then those permits are good for 5 years. And then once you have it, you can go into the gun store, fill the paperwork out, leave with your firearm.
Tell us a little bit about, let's say you get a 911 call, and how do the dispatchers work between the jurisdictions of the sheriff? You got the highway patrol, you got the local police. How does all that, you get that call, there might be a car wreck somewhere. How does that all work with inside Johnson County?
So we're very fortunate that we have a joint communications center that will open up back in, I believe, 2012. Prior to that, there was a dispatch center in the sheriff's office, one at the Iowa City Police Department, one at the University of Iowa Police Department. Then actually State Patrol has a radio dispatch center in Cedar Rapids. So 2012, we opened the JEC, the Joint Emergency Communications Center, located out off, I'm turned around in here. I keep pointing out where I'm pointing.
That's west.
Perfect. Look at that. Even in a closed room, I know which direction I'm pointing. The JEC opened in 2012, and it's a joint communication center for Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, the sheriff's office, and then all the local fire departments. University operates its own dispatch center, which is also a backup in case that one went down. But we consolidated dispatch services to have, more efficient dispatching, but also that way all the local agencies can be on the same frequency so we know what's going on. So for example, if there was a robbery in Iowa City, then let's go back 2010. If there's a robbery in Iowa City, the deputies might not hear about it in a timely manner because they're on two different frequencies. So the information sharing had to go here, over here, and then back out. Having a joint center really puts everybody on the same frequency. It's a great way to share information. It's also a great way to know, okay, if we have a complaint about a road rage involving a gun southbound at the 4-mile marker, the deputy might not be in position, but Coralville officer hears about it right where they can go wait for that vehicle. If we have a shooting, if Iowa City has a shooting down on the Ped Mall and X amount of vehicles are leaving, everybody knows at the same time, here's the suspect vehicle we're looking for. So maybe we can go sit at the 6-mile marker or on 218 or wherever it may be. So we have a joint communication center. If you call 911 in Johnson County, most of these calls come from cell phones now. That call goes to the communication center, and then the call taker, their first question is always going to be, what is the location of your emergency? Because that's the most important thing. We need to know, where do we need to go? The answer to that question also right away tells the dispatcher who gets that call. So if the person says, I'm at the Tiffin Rest area, they know that's going to go to a deputy. If they say, I'm at First Avenue and 5th Street, they know it's going to go to Coralville. The calls map, which is very helpful. I mean, technology is a big asset in the dispatch world because we can also map that call right to where that phone is oftentimes, whether they are at an intersection, or I remember a few years ago mapping one to a sandbar on the Iowa River for some people that were stranded. So we know right away where these calls are coming from, and then they put that information out to the officers, to the deputies, so they know where they need to go and what kind of response they need to provide.
In the past, I can see where that would be chaotic almost. Like over here, you don't know the right hand and the left hand. So
sure,
it sounds way better now.
It's much better, and the mapping is such a big help because back when I started, when we didn't have, when you didn't really have mapping, it would be, where are you at? And then you had to give landmarks. So it was, I'm out here by Bothel's Corner, which I may know where that is, or the person is, but somebody else may not. So the mapping has really brought us forward a long way.
Are the phones on GPS so you know where they're calling from?
Yeah. So again, you call 911, we, 90% of the time we know right where you're calling from.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
where
you
that
know
call's
what's
coming
going
from.
on. Let's take a young person wants to get into law enforcement. Is there I know there's a police academy, I think in Des Moines. Is there a sheriff's academy or how to?
So we're all the same. So deputy sheriffs are certified peace officers, just like an Iowa City police officer or, a police officer works, pick your agency. We are all, we go to the same academy. The way it works in Iowa is the agency that hires you first sends you to the law enforcement academy. So they pay for you to go. You go to that 16-week basic academy, you come back to your agency, and then you got to go through your field training. Once you're a certified officer, you can work anywhere for any local agency in the state. So, and this is something every agency is kind of dealing with right now is this movement of officers and deputies for pay, for benefits. Once you're certified, it opens a lot of doors. So we can hire somebody today, and 2 years from now, they decide, I want to go work at the Cedar Rapids Police Department. Once they're certified, it's a lot easier to go because that other agency doesn't have to pay for you to go to the academy. So it saves the agency a lot of money to hire certified officers. And then you're certified for your career, unless you screw it up.
So what do you train for? I mean, obviously you want to stay in good physical condition. I'm sure the mental side I think would be very difficult, and a lot of things you encounter, I'm sure, is mental illness and how to detect that, drug overdoses, and the things that go on with folks. So can you tell us a little bit more about the specific academies and training and what you go through?
Sure. So the academy covers the kind of the big picture things you're going to deal with throughout your career, the legal training, domestic violence, mental health and crisis intervention training, firearms proficiency, defensive tactics, emergency medical responses, emergency vehicle operations, crash investigations. Everything that we do, you learn the fundamentals of it at the academy. The application comes when you do the field training at your agency. So, getting through the academy is part of it. And then the training on how to put it all together really comes from the agency that you're at. And the thing that makes this job, one of the things that makes this job unique is all those things I mentioned: mental health, crash investigations, domestic violence, sexual assault, traffic enforcement, legal. Those are things you cover in 16 weeks, and sometimes you might deal with all that in a day. And then you've got to do it all over again tomorrow. And that's a tough reality that in law enforcement, we have to make sure we're preparing people for that, because as we've worked hard in the last few years to really step up our recruitment. Recruitment has suffered, numbers are down for people that want to do this job. And so if you follow law enforcement on social media, you see what they're out there doing. You see that we're going to football games and handing out donuts and all those things, rescuing kittens from from storm drains and all those kinds of things, which are things that we do every day. But what we also need to make sure we're sharing is that right after we handed out donuts at the school, we were doing CPR on somebody in the middle of the road from a car crash. And then after that, we have to go back to the office and do a report, and then maybe you have court that afternoon for a drunk driver that you arrested. And then before you went home, you had to take the initial report on a child sex abuse. And then your shift is over, and then you have to go home and your kid's got a baseball game that night.
Yeah.
And you got to do it all over again. So we deal with these things on a daily basis, and we have to make sure we're preparing new people to understand the reality of what we deal with, because we deal with the failings of society. Yeah. We deal with the decisions people make, and they carry a lot of weight, a lot of emotional weight. And so we have to make sure we're preparing new law enforcement for the reality of what it is that we do on a daily basis.
I don't think people appreciate at all what you do, and also the stress.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, you might go be taking a kitty out of a storm drain, and all of a sudden there's a car wreck, and you got to perform CPR. I mean, I can't imagine. That's a lot going on in your mind all day long.
Sure, it is, and I compare it to, they're all little if you look at a Christmas tree, we hang our ornaments on a Christmas tree, and it adds a lot of weight to it. Those traumas that law enforcement deals with on a day-to-day basis over 20 or 30 years have weight, and it becomes very heavy to carry around sometimes, and that's the reality of it. I mean, at the end of the day, those things, they hang on, they don't go away. You just learn to deal with and manage them, and you have to make sure you're taking care of yourself. And that's been a really neat swing to see in the last few years, is the law enforcement culture has shifted to really focus on officer wellness and peer support. And what are we doing to make sure we're taking care of the people in-house? Because we take care of people every day. We have to make sure we're taking care of the people who are doing the work, so they can do the work again tomorrow, but also so they can be the best parent that they can have an enjoyable career. And you see more and more agencies investing money in peer support, officer wellness, mental health check-ins, because we have to take care of the people that are doing the job.
Yeah, in the past, they've probably been neglected. They just expected of them.
That's exactly right. And that's why I think the past generation of law enforcement, you saw, a lot of those statistics about law enforcement come from the lack of care. Things like increased divorce, increased mortality, substance abuse, domestic violence comes from, a lot of it is we weren't taking care of the cops that were doing it 30 years ago. Right. We're doing a lot better job now.
So when you go through the academy, then you're kind of like, I don't know if you call it on-the-job training, but you're getting the experience through going out and investigating things and being with the other officers. Do you have brush-ups or check-ups? Reason I mentioned it, when it comes to restraining somebody, I'm sure that's difficult. Some of these guys are pretty big. I can't imagine after a football game. I just walking downtown after a football game, I'm like, I got to get to my car and get out of here because it's getting kind of wild. And I remember I listened to somebody the other day on a podcast said that maybe a good thing for training to increase the budgets in police departments and sheriff's departments would be to have maybe a monthly check-in where all the officers go to the gym for an hour or two with a jiu-jitsu instructor to learn all those maneuvers and whatnot when they need to handle somebody. And they thought that would be a good, where they're talking about cutting spending, they're talking about adding spending, especially to take care of your own officers and your wellness and the mental side of it. But also from the physical side of it, how often do you recheck into, I don't know if it's jiu-jitsu or what you call how to restrain somebody, but how important is that for your folks?
So it's very important. So we do annual training on a lot of things every year. We have, in January, we have a couple days of multi-agency training, which just covers legal, social services, all those kinds of things. We do firearms training twice a year to be proficient with our firearms. We also do defensive tactics, and that comes into the not only keeping yourself safe, but how to properly handcuff somebody, how to properly retain your weapon if you're in a struggle. Law enforcement in Iowa, there's no state standard for maintaining physical fitness once you're hired. There is a standard for getting into the law enforcement academy, but there isn't one for post-certification.
Why is it?
That's a tough question.
Civil rights or something maybe? Or
I think part of it is, well, then what do you do if somebody fails?
Yeah, I mean, if they're not in physical shadow, they're going to chase somebody down, if they're going to run it,
Yeah. So, and then how do you support them? I think some of it is, well, then what if, as somebody is trying to maintain that fitness for they're 5 years into it and they're trying to stay in shape to maintain the certification. And what if they're working out at work and they get hurt?
Right.
Then does that become a work comp issue? So it becomes very complicated, very hurried.
Yeah,
but as law enforcement administration, you can impose on people that's a goal you want them to have.
Right.
And a lot of people do. And I think this modern generation of law enforcement is really doing a better job about physical fitness. And you see, more and more people going to the gym or things like ferals or whatever.
Right.
But the jiu-jitsu thing I see more and more people doing too.
Right.
You can do those things on your own to increase your training capabilities and keep yourself safe. As we talked about officer wellness, the other part is that physical wellness, because law enforcement has higher mortality post-retirement and close to retirement than a lot of other industries. I can think of officers who retired within just a few years of retirement pass away
Is there a mandatory age for retirement in police?
65. You can't, in Iowa, law says you can't work past age 65. So you hit your 65th birthday, you need to retire before your 66th. The retirement system that's in place can vary a little. So sheriffs and deputies, we can retire at age 50 with at least 22 years of service to draw our retirement. Everybody else is 55, but then the math works out differently. So that's a benefit that's really great for law enforcement because it recognizes this job is really tough on your body, physically and mentally, and encouraging people to get out young enough to go do something else, to enjoy retirement. You know, I really think the days of law enforcement officers working 35 years and into their 60s, I really just don't think you're going to see that anymore. I think the big challenge for in law enforcement anyway, is when you hit that 30-year mark and you're thinking about retirement, for a lot of people, this is all they've ever known. This is your identity. And you're used to the ebb and flow of, boredom and adrenaline, and being in the know and being involved with a really, not only noble profession, but really something that has an impact on people. And I think there's something scary about the possibility of tomorrow, I'm not doing that. And so I think that sometimes keep folks in this longer than they probably should. But that's also what that person, that's all they've ever done. That's what they enjoy and they like it. But the young retirement, that 50 to 55 retirement, really helps encourage people to get out, go do something else, and have it be financially stable enough to afford health insurance. That seems to be the biggest concern.
Huge thing.
Oh yeah, it's wildly expensive.
So I was just thinking, on patrol, a lot of your officers are by themselves, right?
All of ours are, correct.
Yeah. So you got to really be trained up. I mean, you stop somebody, you never know what they're doing, or if they've got a weapon, or what's going on in the car.
The difference, as I mentioned, deputy sheriffs and police officers, we go to the same academy. We do the same job, essentially, the same fundamentals. We enforce the law. We have all the same powers, duties, responsibilities. The big difference between your local police departments, especially in a city, say Iowa City, compared to out in the county for the sheriff's office, the biggest thing we deal with every day is time and distance, because a deputy is out there by themselves in Frytown or Oxford, or pick your location in rural Johnson County, and sometimes our nearest backup may be 10, 15 minutes away, 20 miles away. So it really affects how we make decisions sometimes, and the route we're going to go in dealing with this situation, because I've been, good examples, a pursuit I had one time ended out, it's like 2 a.m, ends out on Rapid Creek Road in the middle of nowhere, and it's just me and him, and I have to wait a while for somebody else to get there. I can't just, I might not have another car within 15 seconds coming up, and then we can, start ordering this person out, giving commands, take them into custody, whatever. So it really does impact how we do our job. We also have to deal with and accommodate the rural setting as far as how our tactics are, because we're vulnerable to, say, gunfire. Because if we're going to in a rural setting, somebody's armed, then we're at the disadvantage, because we've got to drive to that house and they may see us coming a half a mile away. So we really, we have to be prepared for those things. We have to understand the barriers to how we do our job and adjust our tactics, because working in the rural setting is different. But also the rural folks know that. When you live in rural Johnson County, you understand, well, when I call 911, the police aren't going to be here within 2, 3, 5 minutes like you might run into in an urban setting. It's just different in the rural areas in how we police, because time and distance.
I think one of the hardest things that I can't imagine how you train your officers or work through situations with domestic abuse. Mm-hmm. When you get a call that maybe the spouses are going at each other, or they're arguing or whatnot. I think also serving papers might be difficult.
Sure.
Certain times where they're getting something served on them. Tell us a little bit about, I think you had an instance in your family, if you want to share this, which kind of motivated you maybe to get into law enforcement, that stemmed around domestic abuse.
Well, it didn't motivate me to get into it. It motivated me to make it a priority in a different way. So first of all, I mean, domestic violence is something all law enforcement deals with. And when we think of it, we typically think of it in the, husband and wife setting.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, intimate partner violence can happen amongst married couples, whether they are heterosexual couples, in the LGBTQ community, amongst dating relationships at the high school level.
Right.
And it's dangerous across the board. So we know when dealing with domestic violence, there's a heightened danger, and then especially if you have some sort of, whether it's past threats of violence, firearms, substance abuse, it just increases the lethality. So we're keenly aware of the heightened risk involved in domestic violence, and so seeing that through my career. And, first seeing it when I worked in the jail as defendants would come in and dealing with these guys in jail, sometimes repeatedly, the same guys coming in for domestic abuse. That was pretty eye-opening to a 21-year-old kid from West Branch starting in the jail. So then going to patrol, now seeing it on this side of it, dealing with the response and with the trauma involved, but also arresting a guy on a Thursday night for domestic, and then Friday morning at 10 o'clock, he goes back home and violates no contact order. So on the patrol side, you're dealing with it in the moment, in the danger, in the lethality, in the trauma. It was very eye-opening for me now to see both sides of it. But, and like anybody in law enforcement, you also know you're limited with what you can do because of your job and the law. And once a case is, report's done, guy is in jail, it goes through court, you're involved, but now switches to kind of the witness side of it if it goes to trial. So you have these limited things you can do with domestic violence. And so back in 2012, I was finishing up my undergrad. As I mentioned, I went back to school. I was actually sitting in bed one night studying for a test, and my phone rang. And it was one of my sisters-in-law telling me that my sister, she actually my half-sister, but then my sister was dead, that she'd been murdered by her husband. She'd been living in Arizona. She'd been married for quite a few years, and in looking back on it, there were a lot of boxes maybe checked in how these things happen and leading up to it. History of substance abuse, divorce, history of domestic violence. And she'd moved out, going through a divorce. He came over one day to talk, and he shot her. So it brought a lot of things, I'd say, full circle in understanding domestic violence, and now seeing another side where I lost someone. I lost my family member. I lost my sister to it. And so I saw that as a way to, well, what else can I do aside from law enforcement to affect and helpfully, help support victims and survivors of domestic violence. And so that's what got me into working with DVIP and joining the board and just doing what I can to advocate for their agency, because that's something else I can do to make, I don't want to say sense out of the senseless, but at least use it for a catalyst. Because you got a couple options when tragedy happens. You can either let it weigh you down, or you can let it be as a fuel
Motivator.
maybe.
So
So
there-
yeah, I and I've seen these things, a lot of the similarities again, in cases I've worked in dealing with defendants and helping support victims. There's a lot of things that I've seen, a lot of similarities, and there are warning signs. And so, law enforcement has few things that we can do that, I genuinely believe there's few things we can do that actually stop people from dying. But two of those things are traffic enforcement. By cutting down on speeders and drunk drivers, we can prevent people from dying on the roads. And the other thing we can do is intervening in domestic violence and supporting victims. And not a lot of professions give you that opportunity to genuinely do something that can prevent people from dying. And that's one of them, is doing more to support victims and survivors of domestic violence.
Yeah, recently I talked to the director of the domestic violence group, and they are building a building. So for folks that are listening, I'm sure they'd appreciate your financial support. I think they're going to have 60 beds or areas for 60 folks.
Yeah. So the current shelter was overcrowded the day it opened, and this new shelter is such an amazing project because the need is ever increasing for safe shelter, and when you have no other place to go, especially if it's in the middle of the night, you have nothing. This is a place people can go to be safe, get the resources that they need, and hopefully help them escape that situation. The need is there. It's such a cool undertaking that the community is really doing, and the support from the private sector and the public sector, for that matter. Everybody, it's just overwhelming. The amount of local governments that are contributing, but also just the folks in the community that are helping, anywhere from $25 to $500,000 and beyond. It's pretty amazing. It's a reminder that you should never underestimate somebody's willingness to give, and it really shows you that the community supports a mission like this, and that it speaks to people. Statistically, it's about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women are victims or survivors of intimate partner violence. And I think if you keep that in mind, anytime you're in a room full of people, it'll change your perspective a little and remind you that, this is a real issue for a lot of people that we love and care about. Next time you're sitting at a meeting table or the dinner table or Thanksgiving or anywhere in between, think about that statistic. And that if that's not somebody across from you, it could be somebody next to you, and maybe they never told you that story. This really does affect a lot of people, and it's something that we can do that can really start to stop that cycle.
What keeps you up at night being Johnson County Sheriff? Is there anything?
When the power goes out and the fan quits, that kind of thing. No. A couple things. When I was running for sheriff, one of the things I did is I went and met with local police chiefs, retired police chiefs, just to I wanted support, of course, but really what I took from every one of them is I asked them things like, what would you want me to know as a new law enforcement leader? Tell me what I don't know that you wish you would have known. And the North Liberty police chief told me this. She said, what keeps her up at night is making sure that her people have the training and the tools they have to go home. That's what she wants, and is most important more than anything, is that her people can go home at the end of the night, and that she's put them in the best position to do that. And you do that providing them with the training and the tools to do their job and the support. And I've never forgotten that, because that's what I want more than anything, is I want my people I want them to come back to work again tomorrow. A few years ago, my wife put a sticker on the door going out to our garage. It just says, "Come home safe." And at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants. That's my number one priority. It's not listening to Twitter or, angry emails or whatever. Those have context. They have some value. But what my number one priority is every day is making sure that the people that do this job go home at night. And that's what'll keep me up. That's what I want more than anything, is for people to come to work so they can go home and do it again tomorrow and be there for their families. And because tomorrow's not guaranteed for anybody. And I got to make sure I'm doing everything I can to make sure I'm setting them up for the best chance possible.
Well, it's I don't think people appreciate what you guys do enough. I certainly do. I understand a little bit about it. It's thankless in a lot of ways, but God bless you guys for what you do.
I appreciate that.
Because it's demanding. Just like you said, you want to come home at night, and there's a lot of things that I can't imagine with traffic stops and with what's going on in society that you never know. And we need to get you a new jail, right?
Yeah, we sure do.
I mean, of all the things, but this has been fun. I really appreciate you coming in. Support your local law enforcement folks. They do a wonderful job, and we live in a great community. All our areas, Solon, Iowa City, Coralville, North Liberty, Tiffin. What a better place than where we live here. It's good to talk to Iowans. West Branch, small town. I'm from a small town in southern Iowa. It's always great to talk to folks like you, and we certainly want to thank you and appreciate you coming in.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.